everybody. Welcome to a very special episode of Friends Talking Nerdy. This is Tim Jousma.
I'm Sterling.
And we have ourselves a very special guest on the line today. But before we do that, let's get a little story time. Going all the way back to August 2015, I realized I was being a lazy-ass writer. For the longest time, I was telling myself that, hey, I just have writer's block. I'm a gifted writer. I'm the greatest writer in the world. But then I realized that, hey, you actually have to attempt to write in order to claim that. So what I did to kind of break that little stretch was create a website and write about a comic book a day. And during that journey, I came across a little comic series that was amazing and kick-ass called Holy Fuck, written by our special guest today, Nick Marino. How's it going, Nick?
How you doing, Tim? Thanks for having me here.
No problem. Thank you for coming on. Definitely an honor, especially we're recording on Thanksgiving, so the fact that you're here today means a lot.
We really appreciate it.
Gobble, gobble.
There you go. So to start off, a question we ask everybody on the show here. What is your nerd origin story?
I think the problem is I don't have a classic one because I've been into this stuff and doing this stuff previous to when my memory begins, so I don't really I can't give you a sexy one, but maybe I can make one up.
You're the writer, yeah.
So I was 8 years old. 8 years and 37 days. And I was walking next to a dock, and I saw this ship crash. And it was weird because it was very dark, but it didn't look like it was like a boat exactly, but I could tell it was a ship because it made the sounds that ships make. And so I was like, what is this thing? And I ran over to it, and then I opened it up, and there was an alien dying inside of it. And he was like, take my comic book collection. And I was like, whoa, what? Comic books? This is awesome. So I don't know whatever happened to him. He probably died or something. I just left with the comics and shit. But I read them. They were all really bad. And I decided that I was going to love comics for life.
Nice.
There you go. What comic books would you say were the ones that really planted
were
the
in
seeds?
That collection? Yeah, it was mostly Alf. And I think maybe there was a Pirates of Darkwater in there.
Oh, there you go.
And that was about it.
Nice selection there. All right, so your latest comic, Cougar and Cub. Tell the audience a little bit about it.
Well, should I like the plot of it?
A basic summary, yeah.
Okay. So Minerva Manx is the Cougar. She's Megaville's fiercest superhero. She's sort of like their version of a Batman, if you will. She's kind of like their vigilante that's prowling the streets at night.
Prowling.
And over the years, she's taken on a number of different sidekicks who've gone by Cub. And we join them in what is relatively their present. And we see her with one of her latest iterations of Cub on a really slow night on the prowl. And things get a little bit out of hand. And her and this young sidekick have a fling, just a one-night stand. And it completely complicates their working relationship, just like it would when you do something like that with any coworker of yours. And then the question is, how can they keep working together? But the difference is that they're not at a Best Buy. They're not in a office pushing paperwork. They're out on the streets beating up supervillains and sometimes civilians for fun. And it gets even more complicated when the Rogues Gallery finds out, and they really want to take this as their opportunity to get rid of Cougar for good.
Nice. On your website, you did have some. It looked like some early, like rough draft copies of work that the artist, one of your co-collaborators, Daniel Massa, did. Was it that? Were you definitely going for the whole Batman type feel there?
Dynamic duo.
So Daniel Arruda-Massa and I did Holy Fuck and Holy Fuck together.
Yeah.
And even before we started working on Holy Fucked, I think, which had been requested by the publisher, we had started to think about what do we want to do after this. And one of the ideas that I shared with them was this idea of these superheroes having a one-night stand and trying to fix their relationship. And he had a couple of characters he'd been drawing in some of his webcomics on his Tumblr. And they were straight Batman and Robin analogs. Called Wonder Cat and Kid Cat. And I really gravitated towards those designs because they were really nice. They were really classic. We were like, that's just straight up, like, thing, like is Batman banging Robin? Is that what's going on here? Because they, in the old days, they had so much innuendo in the comics.
Yeah.
And we started with that, but then it kind of evolved into something more for a zillion different reasons.
Yeah. I was going through it, and that was the first thing that I noticed about it was the homage to the was it 88 Batman and Robin. It was so funny.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. That was definitely a big influence on what we wanted to do, because we actually really enjoy that kind of stuff. He came to visit myself and my wife, who's my co-writer on the book. She writes all the backups for Cougar and Cub, Rosie Knight. And Daniel was staying with us a couple weeks ago, and we just spent the whole time watching Teen Titans Go, because we just enjoyed those kind of silly superheroes.
Yeah. It's really funny, though, because you have the more mature audience for a lot of your work. And I've been reading comics since I was about 4. And I don't know why, but it always seems to go to that weird spot, how does the Thing have sex with his girlfriend? Or, I bet they do stuff together. Who knows? And it's funny to kind of paint that picture a little bit, because I don't know how many arguments I've had with, so many friends where, who could do stuff like that, I don't know.
Yeah, because look, sex, that's a normal part of life for a lot of people.
Exactly.
But it's often treated really salaciously or very, let's say, scandalously in these superhero stories. And we wanted to treat it in a slightly different way, which was, okay, it happens, but then what happens after that?
Yeah.
If we're looking at these characters, what's the logical conclusion? How did they approach these situations? And the story that we ended up doing, well, there's a few different takes. The lead story by Daniel and I, it ends up becoming this big kind of melodrama, but they're superheroes, so they overcome it with lots of teeth gritting and punching and stuff. But Rosie approached it a few different ways in her backups, where we see sort of Cougar throughout time having relationships with her cubs and or other characters, and how that plays out. So it was fun for us to kind of explore that and then use different kinds of comic book history as the backdrop for that.
I love the artwork with that, because it goes from a classic in the dynamic duo to almost the Mad Magazine style of hyperrealism, but with cartoonish. I don't know. Yeah. I can't. It's almost like a psychobilly.
Daniel, I'm just thrilled to collaborate with him. He's a wonderful friend, and I really love his art, and he delivered big time on all aspects of Cougar and Cub, just bringing a really cool vision to it. And I love the backups that Rosie and Daniel did, because they really got to flex Daniel's artistic muscles and try out a few different eras and really cool looks. And I feel like it complements the lead story well. We just had a good time with that. We wanted this to be something that entertained us,
Yeah, and before we started, I actually showed Sterling one of the first issue of Holy Fucked. Showed him some of Daniel's artwork of Jesus in the shower, and as an atheist myself, I thought that if you are going to believe in a savior, that's the kind of savior you want to believe in, I guess. But tell us about the collaboration with Daniel and Rosie. How did that collaboration work to create Cougar and Cub?
Well, Daniel and I have been working together for, next year is going to be, I think, our 5th anniversary of collaborating, nice. Which is crazy because the time just flies, Mm-hmm. And so that was a no-brainer, pairing up with Daniel again. He's a very ambitious young guy. I think he's 25 now, so we started working together when he was very young. And he is always looking to do the next project, to the point where I had to be like, look, man, I got to slow down a little. I got some other stuff I got to finish, because he's a beast. He always wants to do something new and cool. And so that aspect of working on Cougar and Cub that just kind of filled in the blanks on its own, because we knew that we were going to do another project together. And I love superheroes, and he was willing to try out superheroes. So that just kind of happened. But we were over in London doing a signing for Holy Fucked. And we went to Orbital Comics in central London, And we had a really great signing there. And for me, the best part of the signing was meeting Rosie Knight, because I thought this is a really interesting person. She's super cool. You know, I was kind of crushing on her a little bit. And then fast forward a few months later, and Rosie and I are talking on Skype all the time because I'm out here in California. And you know, I was telling Daniel, you know, we're getting along really well. You know, she's going to come over here for a visit, all this stuff. And he's like, hey, you know, we're getting really close to finishing up Cougar and Cub, our lead story. We want to do some back matter. Why don't you see if Rosie would like to write some backups? Because he knew that she's a writer, and obviously she loves comics. Well, not obviously, but she does love comics and was working at a comic shop at the time. And I floated the idea out to her, and she was like, yeah, I'll give it a crack. She'd done some mini comics in the past and short stories, but nothing quite like this. And that aspect of the collaboration was unexpected, but went incredibly smoothly, and we had a really fun time putting that stuff together. But then fast forward a few more months, and Rosie came out to America, and we decided that we didn't want to be apart again, and we were very much in love, and we got married after we'd already started making these backups together. And so in a way, Cougar and Cub is like a
fantasy becomes
it holds an interesting place for us, because it's not only this project we worked on together, but now it's become sort of like part of what brought us together in our relationship too. So that was cool.
So, important question: were you the Cougar or were you the Cub?
I guess slightly on the Cougar side.
All right.
Well, when we talk about the subject matter that you're writing about, I would say my parents fall into that category of like very, very like norm masses, kind of like middle of the road. And when you talk to somebody about what you do or what you write about or like the art that you do, how do you, I mean, you talk about it so well where it's not off-putting or weird, but then it can be very easily consumed by the masses, just from listening to you right now for the last few minutes.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. It's always interesting, though. But, like, would you say your support structure or the people around you are comfortable with it, or have they just learned to accept it over time?
I guess it's a mix of both, depending on the person. I've found that comics in general, and I'd imagine that if you guys are relatively lifelong comic book fans as well, it's not always something you can share with everybody, not even because of the appropriateness of content, but just because some people just don't get it, really.
Yeah.
And so in that regard, there's a little bit of a disconnect where people are aware of what comics are, but they don't want to take the steps to necessarily understand the medium too much deeper. So for the people who might be more put off by the content in Holy Fuck and Cougar and Cub, who might find that a little bit objectionable, let's say, a lot of times those tend to be people who don't interact with the details of what I do anyway.
Yeah.
My mother, she passed away a good chunk of years ago. She would have been a bit disturbed maybe by this stuff. But, and she was when I was doing webcomics that were more in line with this kind of stuff. But also, I think in her case, you know, she was religious. She was also, you know, a bit more, let's say, like a conservative in her taste when it comes to raunchy comedy. She just knew that I liked comedy, and she knew that I liked the stuff, and she wanted to understand it, even if she didn't. But we didn't have a lot of deep conversations about it. So I guess maybe the answer is that there are certain people you just don't talk to about it. They don't need to know anything beyond the fact that you make comics. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
the
ones
absolutely.
that do really care, they ask you a lot of questions, and then as you tell them, if they want to know more, they continue to ask more. And those are the ones who are more comfortable about it. And when I talk to them, they want to know, you know, oh, like, that's such a gross panel you did. How did you make that? Or that's such an outrageous, you know, why did you make Jesus naked? Like, you know, they ask those kind of questions. But
I'm sure the answer is
because people
because
don't want to know have a very good way of avoiding it on their own, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just comics themselves are now recently making it into the mainstream with you know, larger movies like Avengers. We just saw Justice League. And then you have fringe comics. You have things like Why the Last Man, what was it? Saga recently just is making a run. And then you have a little more of the, I would say, fringe, which things like Holy Fuck or things like that might fall into. But it's even funnier how it has a very strong fan base. And it just always kind of befuddled me how they managed to stay out of the spotlight or limelight.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? How there's like tiers of interest that culturally seem to show themselves. And you can have something like, you know, it's on your cereal box. Then you can have something that, it's in your bookstore, but it's not, you know, you're not going to be walking around with like Saga socks or anything.
Yeah.
But then you can have something that is equivalent to, I guess, going to like a dark little club where you pay like $15 to get in and you watch this band play, and that's kind of like your Holy Fuck, I guess, or your Cougar and Cub.
Yeah, exactly.
The Gwar of comics.
Not necessarily our goal, but that's kind of the way that these things work out sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, one thing after reading Cougar and Cub, I mean, one thing I've been amazed at, and I've been amazed at with your other work as well, is the quality of the writing. You know, with the subject material being what it is in the wrong hands, it could be executed rather poorly. Mm-hmm. The writing process, when you came up with the idea and you were writing the script, how did that process come together? How did you kind of balance the whole awkward subject material with putting together one hell of a good story?
Well, first off, thank you very much, because that means a lot to me for you to say that, and I appreciate that, because that's something that I can't always tell if people recognize, that there is a balance to this process and there is some thoughtfulness going into it. It's not about shocking people, but rather entertaining ourselves and hopefully entertaining readers by tossing in some taboo, but with some things that also make you feel good too. There's a little bit of triumph. There's a little bit of heart in there as well, you know, so we try to get a good mix of it. I think really that's just, when you recognize that aspect of it, I think you're just sort of getting a little piece of the creators in there, if that makes any sense. That's sort of just our viewpoint. That's something that, you know, myself and Rosie and Daniel and I'll share. Like, we enjoy, how could I say, like topics that can be kind of like, I don't know. I don't exactly know the right words. Maybe I'm more risky with that particular aspect of it. But I think you're also seeing our thoughtfulness in there, you know, and we each bring a different kind of thoughtfulness to it. The writing process for that kind of material. Well, first, I think, what would I want to pick up at a comic shop? That's kind of my main impetus with anything that I do. And then beyond that, the next step is to think, what would make me laugh? What would make me excited to turn the page? And then once I kind of establish what those things are, I think to myself, okay, how can I do that? But how can I make this inclusive? Because I want to be able to share this with all kinds of different people. And I'm fortunate that a lot of those people, I just think to myself, are my friends, you know, lots of cool friends that I have with different backgrounds, different interests, different, let's say, I don't know what you would say, standards. I don't even know what the right words are all the way in that regard, but it's about balancing that desire to kind of push myself as a storyteller and say, okay, what's the logical conclusion to this outrageous scenario? But also say to myself, how can I be excited to share this with this friend, that friend, this person, this kind of person? Because I want people, when they pick up this book, to feel like there's at least some kind of inviting aspect to them. I hope that answers the question.
It does.
Well, one of the things that I first picked it up and I saw the intro and it kind of led further down the rabbit hole, and I was like, oh, whoa. Okay. I thought that was going to keep going for a long duration of the book when it was actually just kind of the main topic, and then you sprinkled in a lot of reactions to it, and that's what I actually really appreciate, like Cub's whole reaction to the whole situation when he actually kind of reacted pretty volatilely. especially for someone who's younger. Like when you don't know how to grasp or fully comprehend your feelings, which was really, really interesting as well. And then
I can remember being a young guy, and relationships would make you angry, and they didn't go the way you expected them to go, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's sort of kind of the thought process that we were channeling with that.
That's never happened to me, but
well, one of the other things too is I loved the cat puns. Like,
thanks.
The phone call. Like, oh no, it's the cat call. That I just little things sprinkled in like that were what kind of like were the icing on the cake and kind of brought it to a next level for me.
and channeling your inner Stan Lee, I got to ask, how long did it take you to come up with as many alliterations that you sprinkled throughout the script as you did?
It took a lot of work. The captions weren't even in the book originally. In the original scripts, it was just dialogue between the characters and occasionally captions to let you know what location you were in. And I shared the first issue with some friends, and they were like, I think you might need to like add, you should, when you introduce the villains, you should say who all of them are. And at first I was really resistant to the idea. I was like, people will figure it out as they read the story. And then I kind of sat on it for a little bit, and I was like, yeah, that's a good point. And then I got some feedback from other people who were like, God, I like this, but this first issue, it made me feel really yucky. And I think that's because for them, the only thing they were seeing were sort of the hyper intense visuals on the page and then minimal dialogue interactions between the characters. And Daniel and I were like, this isn't quite the reaction that we expected people to have to this work. And so we thought, well, let's flesh it out a little bit. We got space on these pages. We can add some extra comedy here. So instead of people saying to us, it was good, but I felt a little weird, like they could say, oh man, that was really funny. I really loved that joke there. I really felt like you were putting me in like a sort of era, like it was homaging an era of storytelling, And so I went back and I added captions to the first issue, and I'm naturally a very alliterative and I don't know, corny kind of guy when it comes to that stuff, and it just really fit. So I went back through all of our scripts and I added in those captions, and all that was actually done after the dialogue was done. So I spent June through July of 2016, well, into early August. I can remember I was up until 5 a.m. on August 8th finishing it.
Damn.
And just adding in a bunch of captions to kind of fit that. So that was all done post the, full story, I guess you would say.
Post-production.
Yeah. Well, it's really funny. Now that you said you were watching a bunch of Teen Titans Go, I'm seeing a lot of the art style from that with the eyes, the hair, and even the action sequences and stuff. Was that influenced in any way?
Ironically, no. I didn't start watching that show until about a year ago.
Oh, okay.
And Daniel had never really sat down and watched that big of a chunk of it, but he was a big fan of Dan Hip, who's one of the designers on the show.
Nice.
And I guess producers. I'm not sure exactly what Dan's title is, but I think that it just happened to be a case of us maybe being influenced by similar things that show is and having similar sensibility.
Yeah.
But also, I don't know. Yeah, that's it.
Well, and I'm looking at it now too, just I have it in front of me, and I like the use of dynamic color throughout the whole thing. It's not just like yellows and reds, there's pinks and purples and stuff like that with like black backgrounds, but it flows very well, and it's pleasing to the eye, which is also really, really great. It is slightly reminiscent of Frank Quietly and his use of like dynamic color, even in like darker series. If you're familiar,
I love color.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like a lot of people stray away from like the bright colors, like pink or purple or things like that, and they'll stick to like primary colors. But it's really nice to look at too.
I'm just saying, I love, when I think about comics that I love, they're colorful. They are, how would you say, expressive. Mm-hmm. And don't get me wrong, I've loved comics that aren't like that. But if you're going to present me with the option of what do you want to read right now, I'm going to pick something that's expressive. I'm going to pick something that's colorful. I'm going to pick something that's really immersive in that regard, where you're sort of getting that reality, like reality squared, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. One question I want to ask was this. Back in early November here on Twitter, you did mention some frustration with your publisher in terms of how they've dealt with this particular comic. Did you want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I'm really glad to share anything about that stuff. We've had some drama, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. We have some. Yeah. Well, I have some friends at Oni Publishing, and I can understand how not only getting something to print, but making sure that you have like your creative control, or just you want to be content with the final product can be really, really hard or difficult.
It's so tricky, man.
Yeah.
In this particular case, we did Holy Fuck with Action Lab Danger Zone, which is their mature reader side of Action Lab Comics. It's really all the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, we didn't love the experience. There were a lot of difficulties to it. But there were two things going on. One, we thought that's the way it had to be, because that was all that Daniel and I knew within that type of business. We thought that it was always going to be difficult. And then the other thing was, I guess, two, we figured this was we could use this experience as a stepping stone, not thinking about how to maximize the experience at the time, but looking ahead towards something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can't say whether I was wrong about any of that, but I can say that when we pitched Cougar and Cub around, and we spoke to a few larger publishers about working with them, and it just ended up not being right for those publishers. We found ourselves in a situation where we could potentially bring Cougar and Cub back to Action Lab because we knew that they had a need for material and we had some relationships there already. Or we could self-publish. And at the time, this was maybe about a year and a half ago, self-publishing wasn't something I was interested in doing. I'd done a bunch on my own, mini comics and stuff like that before.
And it's pretty hard,
but I decided,
too. Yeah.
It's tough, exactly. Yeah. It's very tough. And unfortunately, because this was a superhero book, we might have had more options if it was a different genre. But Oni, for example, a really solid publisher, they don't take superhero pitches.
Yeah.
So that was, that automatically eliminated, let's say, 50% of your comic book indie presses, right?
Yeah.
And we were very fixated on being in the direct market with this book, which in retrospect I think was also another mistake, because I've really become close to some wonderful people within the past couple of years who don't really worry about whether they're in comic shops, or even if it's not that, they're more focused on getting out the book the way they want it than they are on making sure that it has direct market distribution. And I think that was probably something that we should have taken to heart a bit more at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But we said, okay, we'll sacrifice some of our comfort in this process to get this back into comic shops. And so Action Lab was interested in publishing this book. But I think that the biggest mistake we made was, with Holy Fuck, we brought them something that was so far outside of what they did that they couldn't really make that line up with Zombie Tramp. They couldn't really make that it wasn't something, it's Jesus and Satan falling in love together and going on this weird adventure with a nun. It's not as easily confused with their other material as a female superhero and male sidekick hooking up could be.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where the mismatch began. So we signed with them. We shouldn't have, because we knew it would be difficult. But I also never imagined it would be as difficult as it was, because the company's gone through some changes within the past couple of years. And it's become much more set in its own ways, and I think because of that, it was just not a good fit for this book. And so we've really struggled. We didn't get the order numbers they were hoping for, but we also didn't receive the marketing that we were hoping for from them.
Yeah.
And so it really kind of set off on a bad foot, which was about a year ago when all that stuff began with the publishing. It was tough.
Speaking from experience, I have a marketing background, and like usually companies like that, even if they're even larger, they might have maybe one or two guys pushing it, which is crazy.
Yep. It's so minimal what they are willing to provide. In the case of Action Lab, they're not really a proper company. They don't really have much paid staff. They have no office. It's essentially the CEO, Brian Seaton, who kind of controls the company's finances and makes most of the decisions.
Yeah.
And it becomes tough when this is somebody who maybe you feel like doesn't understand your story, and also just on a personal level, I just don't get along with them very well. So that really made it complicated to take advantage of the resources that they had when we sort of got the feeling from the beginning that we were very deprioritized to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember also around that same, it may have been a little bit earlier, on Twitter, Action Lab had their Twitter account hacked, and then,
Yeah, right.
And then reading, it was one of your wife's responses. She insinuated that the folks at Action Lab thought maybe that you and her were somehow involved with that. Can you go into a little detail?
Oh my God, that was too funny, man. Yeah, like about a month and a half ago, they weren't hacked. Somebody at Action Lab, or I can't say who it is for sure, but I'm about 90% sure it was just Brian being belligerent on the Twitter account, and they did some really stupid tweets to a friend of Rosie and I, and who also happens to be Rosie's editor over at Women Write About Comics, which is just a terrific comics criticism and culture blog. And she was just asking them about this cover that they were putting out for New York Comic Con that was very thoughtless, let's say. And the response that she got back from was really bizarre from the Twitter account, right? But after us having spent time with the company, it seemed very in tone with how they talk behind the scenes.
Oh.
And we were interacting with it a bit too, and getting some big laughs out of it, because this shit was just outrageous.
Yeah.
But then they claimed that they were hacked afterwards, which to me just sounds like the most bogus thing I've ever heard. But I think because I used to help back when I was doing Holy Fuck and Holy Fucked, I knew that this company had a very small marketing team, and I knew their reach was only so much. So I offered to help out with some of their Tumblr and Twitter needs at the time, mostly so I could promote my own books, right?
Yeah.
And I think because I still had login to all their stuff, well, I don't know if it actually worked or not, but because I had previously had a login to their stuff, and because I was laughing it up so much at the time that the hacking was happening, I think it was easier for some of them to point a finger at me, because I don't really give a fuck, as opposed to pointing it at themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What part of California are you in, if you don't mind me asking?
I live in Long Beach.
Oh, okay. I don't know if you remember, but there was a while back when someone on the BART Twitter account just got really real with a lot of people, and they were like, "Oh, hey, we're real sorry about that. Sorry," and it probably just was someone late at night who was probably just disgruntled.
I think that's exactly what it was. I think it was somebody who felt personally affected by getting negative feedback about some of the comics, and they didn't approach the situation as diplomatically as they should have. I feel like that's my very generous assertion of what happened. But let's get real. Those motherfuckers didn't get hacked. Okay, all right. Nobody cares enough to hack them. I didn't even care enough to hack them.
I was going to say, I bet half the population doesn't know they exist.
Well, another question I would have to ask too is, obviously it sounds like you couldn't care less, but what does this type of behavior do to other independent comic creators out there?
Or people who are interested in probably publishing with them?
Yeah, I mean, what advice would you give them?
In regard that I want my book I want people to be able to read my book. I want people to be able to respect where the book is coming from. But due to various different things that have gone on within the past year, I was already at the point of just like trying to move on by then. And I was just like, this was a good little chortle at the end of the whole publishing nightmare for Cougar and Cub. But in regards to how do I feel about how that might affect others, I just think it's a bummer, but I think it's very systemically representative of the kind of bullshit that's been allowed in comics publishing for a while. I think because it was seen as a cottage industry, because it was seen like, there are too few spots for how many people want to get in. Mm-hmm. But I think we've also seen within the past month that people are being held more accountable for that kind of shitty behavior. Now, granted, I'm not saying that starting some Twitter beef is an equivalency to sexual abuse. That's a totally different scenario.
Yeah.
But I also think the shitty mentality at the core of it is very similar. And that I look forward to in the future seeing a publisher that behaves like that, paying the consequences for it, if that makes sense. And I think it's a bummer that people can see them behaving like this. But at the same time, you know what? If you took a look at the content they've been putting out within the past couple of years, it's no real surprise that they would act like this.
Yeah.
And maybe some people would see our content as being a part of that. I don't know. I'm not like on some moral high ground here or anything. I'm just saying that I think that it's. You know what? Whatever. That's.
Well, you brought up a really really good point.
That's just indicative of the messy way that they run everything. I mean, what do you want to do?
Yeah. You brought up a really good point. We're seeing industries like never before that probably thought themselves untouchable, and they're actually having to really deal with the consequences of their actions. And I could definitely see after, Hollywood kind of has the spotlight shown on it and like all the little seedy details coming out, it could be an even bigger thing in the comic book industry, because you have a lot of these groups and individuals who will really do almost anything to get their work in the public eye. And it can be really, really hard, because I remember, I've gone to a bunch of Comic Cons and I've worked at a comic book shop for so long, and you have these people who are like, man, I would do anything to get into this industry, and all I hear are like horrible horror stories about trying to get work published, or just the office environment, specifically from a marketing standpoint. I couldn't even imagine being a writer or an artist.
Yeah, it's funny. When I think back on it, I rarely hear stories about how great it was to work for this comic publisher or that comic publisher, right? Yeah. Isn't it normally more you just hear about how, trying it was?
It reminded me of my days at GameStop, where, you love and you have a passion for it, but in the end, it's kind of just numbers.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what the business of art is difficult because of that. Because art is really fueled by imagination and passion and creativity, and business is rarely fueled by any of that. So there's definitely like a distinct contrast between those two impulses.
Yeah. I've seen kind of the best of like self-publishing. You mentioned you were possibly thinking about self-publishing or going online. One of my favorite comics to follow was Dr. McNinja, and he had his own little web series for a long time, and then it got picked up by one of our local buddies here, Dark Horse. And then there's another series that I used to follow called Boxer Hockey with Tyson Hess, and it was really funny. It was ubiquitous on the internet, but time and money just wasn't on his side, and it kind of crumbled, and it forced him to work on other avenues.
It's tough, man. It's really tricky to figure out how you can be sustainable, but, and not just sustainable financially, but sometimes it's sustainable emotionally, so you don't get so discouraged that you don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
And those are things that we are trying to navigate every day when we're making comics. How do we stay motivated? How do we make sure that this isn't a bad business decision? And the truth is, we make a lot of mistakes while we do it, and I think that every comics creator does. Some are just maybe better at pushing through than others are, and some are hungrier than others are to get places at the expense of others, let's say. I see it happening. The more I get to know people, the more I can identify the individuals who I can say, oh, they're the ones who don't care if their collaborator got screwed, or they don't care if they don't deliver on this, And I'm fortunate to be able to say that the position I'm in right now is not one that I'm desperate to do anything that I need to see anybody get screwed over,
Yeah.
All right. One more question I want to ask. Again, my introduction to you was through Holy Fuck. Are we going to see more?
Afraid not. I think the Action Lab boat has sailed for Nick Marino. So that's considering that any sequels we do for that would have to be with them until something changes.
That a part of the contract
structure. That's done.
Okay.
And honestly, Daniel and I only had a cursory idea of the story we wanted to tell next. If we wanted to, we'd much rather do new things. So that wasn't, you're not losing out on some great masterwork we had planned or anything. Sorry to say. And I kind of wrote the end of Holy Fucked, for me personally, as the writer, to be an end that I found really satisfying, that I felt really kind of wrapped up that adventure nicely. I don't know if you felt the same way as a reader.
No, I did. I mean, I wanted more, but I also don't want a Dark Knight Rises type of comic either. For a third.
Jesus rises again.
I mean, if they were to go on another adventure, I think that we've had a few ideas. One is that maybe we wait 20 years until Jesus and Satan's daughter is all grown up, and we join her on an adventure, and we'd wait 20 years in real time to let her grow up.
Oh man,
that was one idea we had. Another one was that we do have some different obstacles they could face. Anansi is still out there after all this, and sort of if you will, pulling the spider webs behind everything the whole time, and maybe they would be looking to do something else. And we had some ideas with how we could work with Anansi, but also those were just fun things that we were spitballing to each other. They're not anything that made it beyond having a good time joking about what we could do next. So that's done. Daniel and I have a few other projects that we're cooking slowly, and Daniel's been posting some stuff about those lately too. If you follow his Twitter and Instagram feeds, which are D. Aruda Masa. And I have been in secret working for years with a collaborator named Nils Petter Norlin, who's an artist from Sweden. And we have one graphic novel that's pretty much in the can, and we have another one that's very significantly into it. And these are a departure from the sort of more, let's say, like outrageous stuff that I've done with Daniel. And they're much more, they're open to a wider age range of readers. And right now I'm just trying to find the best way to get those out to people, whether it's finding a good publisher, finding an agent, or potentially self-publishing if I don't see any options I like in those areas.
Well, no matter what happens, you got a fan in me, and for my part, I will do what I can to spread the word about your work. I really, really, really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I mean, again, we're recording on Thanksgiving. The fact that you gave up some of your time that you could be watching the Detroit Lions lose. I'm a Lions fan, but I got to admit the truth. But the fact that you took this time really does mean a lot. And you were one of the first comic creators out there that really took notice of my work. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Well, I really appreciate both of you guys, and I'm thankful for you taking the time to ask me about my work and have this conversation with you. It's very cool. So, Tim, Sterling, enjoy your feasts.
All right. Thank you.
If you're feasting.
Yeah, we got a whole pie here ready to go.
Punch and pie. Well, thank you again.
Great. Yeah, well, shout out to the Detroit Lions, stinking it up for how many years now?
All right.
Thanks, Nick. It was a pleasure having you. Yeah, the best part about it, too, is you also seem to enjoy your work. So we appreciate that you are having fun and doing what you love.
I do love to make comics sometimes.
Except when companies get hacked.
It's tough, but comics is rarely something you start doing because it just seems like something you can do whatever, you don't give a fuck. It's a business and a medium that takes a lot of work. So you got to have some love in there somewhere, and I got a lot of it.
Nice.
There you go. Well, thanks again, and folks, thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.
Take it easy.
And with that, another episode of Friends Talking Nerdy is in the books, and a very special episode at that. Once again, we would love to thank Nick Marino for taking time out of his day on Thanksgiving Day of all days for chatting with us about his new comic, Cougar and Cub. You can find it on Comixology. Definitely recommend checking out his previous works as well. Holy Fuck and Holy Fucked are two amazing stories. And the work of his collaborator, Daniel Arudamasa, amazing, and his wife Rosie Knight did some amazing work too on Cougar and Cub, so definitely check it out. Once again, thank you, Nick, for taking the time out of Thanksgiving Day to talk with us on our podcast here. It really means a lot. As I mentioned in the story time at the beginning of the episode, when I first started reviewing comic books, doing the comic book a day thing to try to spur the creative juices again, he was one of the first comic book creators out there that really responded to my reviews. So I really, really appreciate it. I mean, the fact that, he didn't need to do it, and the fact that he did it really kind of, kept me going on to the point that, hey, doing this today. So once again, thank you. Next week, we're going to be back with part 4 of Noel and my discussion of 80s movies. We're about halfway through the list right here. Him and I had a very long conversation. In the coming weeks, we are going to have the Friends Talking Nerdy holiday special. I can't guarantee that it's going to be anywhere near as good as a Star Wars holiday special, but at least for the first 15 minutes, you will be able to understand everything we have to say. So once again, thank you for listening. As always, we would love to thank Christopher Lazarick for his work on the amazing theme song he made for this show here. Head to his website, ChristopherLazarick.com, for information on how to order his EP, Here's to You. He's a talented singer. Again, another person who did not need to help Friends Talking Nerdy out the way he did. He came up with one hell of a theme song that will stay in your head. So help him out. If you're a fan of this show, you are required to go to his website, find out where to purchase his EP, and just simply buy it. He's a good guy for doing what he did. So, again, next week we're going to have part 4 of the 80s movie discussion. Future episodes, we're going to be looking at, we're going to have the Friends Talking Nerdy holiday special, and who knows, maybe we'll talk about a summary of all the entertainment events of 2017. One more thing, too. Avengers Infinity War. If you have not seen it, once this podcast is done, go to YouTube, put on that trailer. I cannot wait for May. Now, granted, Black Panther is going to be up first. That's mandatory viewing. But Avengers Infinity War, the only way that movie will, I don't know. One thing I really want to see in that movie is this, and sorry for stuttering. The post-credit scene, since we know it's going to be part 1 of a 2-parter, the heroes are lying, maybe dead, maybe unconscious, we don't know. The camera pans across, and then you come to a rock face, what appears to be a rock face. Before you know it, eyes open up on the rock face, and you hear the words, "It's clobbering time," and then cut to black. I would absolutely die if that happened. So, Marvel, you can have that idea for free. Hopefully Disney can buy the Fox movie library for that. But anyway, sorry about that digression. We will see you next week.
Please welcome David Nelson.
Good morning, students. How are we all feeling today? I would like to share with you all my...
No! Dude! No fucking way!
that words are like bullets. And if you give...
Stop! 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 Look! They put a little suit on him!